Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on when you're watching. This is MMA Mobsters, episode 29. Pat Miletich in the Quad Cities. How you doing, sir? Why are you here? I know that you are doing some promo work for your fight with Mike Jackson. I actually saw some of that promo work. I was very entertained by it.
Xi Jackson.
Yes, represent deep agent of China, I believe. That's actually on Wikipedia.
Xi, how are you, Xi?
How's the prep for the fight going? You can look at the Caged Aggression social media, Mike Goodwin's social media, probably Pat's social media. I saw some of that, and I got goosebumps seeing you and Pulver train in the exact gym where it all started, and it's just so cool, all the stuff that's coming out of this fight. I knew that the buildup was going to be cool, but some super cool video that our producer Justin shot of you and Jen's training, and I'll let you talk about that because it gave me goosebumps.
No, it was a good time. I mean, Jens and I weren't going real hard or anything. We did some hand fighting, some wrestling, did a little bit of light boxing and timing work, and then a little bit of jogging. You know, I'm just picking things up. I've been mostly working on strength work and explosive stuff, and then now I'll start the endurance portion of things and get myself lean down to 175 pounds, which is what Jackson wanted, so I'm obliging him. So yeah, I'll come in lean, stealthy, mean, fast, 57-year-old monster.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit biased, but even trying not to be biased, I thought that you were moving well in the videos, and you even said yourself that humbly you're nowhere near where you want to be, but it seems like it's riding a bike, and it comes back to you. Are you going to be walking around at 175 fight week? Will there be any need to get in a sauna and cut weight? No,
I'll probably be walking around at 185, probably. Right around there.
So you will cut a little weight.
Yeah, I'll cut some weight. Yeah, but it gives me a reason to get back in, actually really good shape. I'm in decent shape. I'm not in bad shape. I still work out, of course, anyway, but, having something to train for, it's kind of a love-hate relationship, to be honest with you. I fully expected I don't want to fight. I mean, when Michael Nunn and I fought 2 years ago, we did that to get the crowd out because of the lockdowns and the ridiculousness that was going on.
I believe, yeah, 3 years ago.
And 2020. So for me, I have no desire to hurt people or anything like that or fight. But Mike Jackson gave me a really good reason by doing the underhanded shit he's done. And I think that at some point people have to start standing up for all those people who lost their jobs, people who lost their businesses, people who couldn't go see loved ones in hospitals and nursing homes. This is just common sense health stuff. This is not a political. Health has nothing to do with politics. Health has to do with understanding true health and fitness. And when you train and become a world champion in fighting, you actually have to do a lot of research into what makes the human body tick at that level.
Yeah.
And put the right things in it. And that includes your fucking immune system, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself from getting sick, right? Super, super important. And that's what makes the human body tick. And that creates super high-level athletes. And that's the way it is. But Jackson has motivated me to get back in shape and slap the shit out of his 37-year-old ass.
And the thing that keeps coming up to me with this is we live in a day and age where there aren't always, or not even often, are not consequences for your actions. I think that was why it's so refreshing. There's a video floating around Twitter. I believe you've seen it where there's an African-American guy who robs a store that's owned by Sikhs, usually very peace-loving people. Not so peace-loving when they get their store robbed. He is shoveling money and cigarettes into a trash can. Then all of a sudden, one of them tackles him, and the other one starts beating him with a broomstick. And he's screaming, "Oh, help, help,
I think it was a bamboo pole.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens to you in those countries when you steal.
Yes.
They beat the bottoms of your feet with bamboo sticks.
Yes.
So you can't walk.
Yes.
And that's, I guess, yeah, more of that sort of action would probably be pretty corrective.
I think it would be healthy. I think it'd be healthy. There are consequences for your actions.
There will be more beatings until morale improves. The famous saying. I think that was the Marine Corps.
And I look forward to every week getting updates on the fight as we move closer to October 14th. Correct?
Yep. October 14th is the day.
And we will see Miletich slim down, and I will continue to slim down just because.
Yeah, you're looking stealthy yourself.
I appreciate that, brother. Yeah. I appreciate that. And maybe I don't want to be a burden or a distraction, but maybe I'll hop in on one of your training sessions in the Quad Cities and just it'll be fun. It'd be fun to watch you close up.
We can do a leg workout. You can do my leg workout with me.
All right. I'm in.
All right.
Last.
Ask Justin about the leg workout. Justin, how was your last leg workout with me?
Yeah, it's intense, man. You walk like Red Fox afterwards.
Justin, extremely talented guy.
He enjoyed his vacation in Las Vegas after the workout.
I bet he did. Extremely talented guy with cameras and writing and everything else, but it gave me a little chuckle. He was
and a former wrestler.
Running alongside Pat like it was a Rocky montage, and then after about 2 minutes you hear Justin go, "Okay, I need a break." So that was
we're gonna get him back in shape too.
Super cool. And you'll have to watch that. Where do you go to watch that, Justin? The Caged Aggression social media, or has a lot of that not been posted yet? Where do people go to watch these really cool videos with Miletich and Pulver?
It's on Goodwin's. It should be on Goodwin and Cage Aggression's Facebooks.
Okay.
And also we're going to post it here on the pay-per-view site. And hopefully it'll get out there in the media too.
Okay. So go to cagedaggression.tv to buy it, watch those videos. Also go to Mike Goodwin's Facebook, Caged Aggression's Facebook. I got goosebumps watching it, and this we're all excited. I live in the Quad Cities. The Quad Cities is buzzing. Whenever people see me, they want to talk about Pat's fight. So speaking of fights, we had a great card from a betting standpoint last week, Pat. Some guys that we were big on. We loved Almabayev. He was dominant. We liked Woodson. He was dominant. We liked Carlston Harris at plus money. He won. We liked Kyler Phillips to beat Ione Barcelos. He won. We liked Tanner Bozer Kamer. Goes to decision. That was plus money. That one. We liked Diego Lopez to beat Gavin Tucker. We liked Tatiana Suarez. Tatiana Suarez is, and I'm not a big fan of hype. She reminds me more of Khabib every time that she fights. The way that she is relentless on the takedown, the way that Andrade totally chucked the takedown, and Suarez dives, puts her forehead on the mat, and just grabs an ankle. And before you know it, Suarez is on top of her. Showed in improved striking. I'm not trying to overhype her or be ridiculous, but I don't think calling her a female Khabib is completely crazy, because she really, I think she'll be champion soon. I think she could be a double champion. I think that it really is only injuries. She had a very bad spinal and leg. Really has only been injuries. It's held her back. She chokes out Andrade in the second round after showing adequate striking, all-world wrestling. I'm a fan, man. I'm a fan. She hasn't lost. Every time that I've bet on her in the UFC, she has won. I think she'll continue to win.
You like people that make you money, don't you?
I do, but I also like seeing these little things like steady improvement, fighting smart but not timid, having a good cage IQ, a good head on your shoulders. Tatiana Suarez checks all the freaking boxes for men, and I'm a fan, and I will continue. I don't see any fight where I would not bet her.
So you're saying we did pretty well last week?
We did, and our favorite bet, I haven't even gotten to, Pat. Corey Sandhagen, absolutely dominant. Was not the most entertaining fight, but I don't really care. You can have the most boring fight in the world as long as you win my bet for me. That's all I really care about. Got booed by the Nashville, Tennessee crowd. When you think about Corey Sandhagen, you think about this all-world Muay Thai karate striker. He dominated Rob Font. Wrestling, didn't have to throw much. I would have been fine with that. It was a good game plan. Like I said, you won the fight. That's what matters. But then he comes out. he absolutely tore the shit out of his bicep. It was heavy bruise popping out all the way around, really ugly injury. And he said that I was forced to wrestle because I literally could not extend my power arm.
Well, it shows how good he actually is, right?
Yeah.
When you lose an arm like that and you can't use it hardly at all, and you still are good enough to beat a world-class fighter, that speaks volumes.
Beat him dominantly.
Yeah.
You've talked on this a little before. I have a feeling what you will say. How do you feel about people who say, I don't care that he won, I wasn't entertained, or he took a boring fight, or he took the coward's way out? What do you say to those people?
Well, he got paid. He got paid his winner's money. That's what counts. That's all that matters. He gets to deposit twice as much money in the bank. So nobody else's opinion really fucking matters.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So sorry for the F-bombs. I'm feeling a little animated today.
That's okay. That's okay. I do them too. It's hard not to. So speaking of getting paid, Pat, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was supposed to fight on the UFC violence card, the bad motherfucker card. That is literally what the belt is called. Don't get mad at me. One fight was canceled on that card. That was Michel Pereira, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson goes on a podcast. We should get Wonderboy on our podcast sometime. Goes on a podcast and says, in his very southern charm, nice guy voice, I still haven't been paid. I'd like to be paid. Haven't been paid. I trained. I showed up to the fight.
Made weight.
UFC ain't paid me nothing. He
also does a lot of broadcasting for them, correct?
I think he does.
I've seen him on some broadcasts with ESPN and some other stuff.
I've seen that less. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I've seen that much less. He makes a lot of sense. I think he does a lot of stuff that Pulver does, where he does Twitch from his home.
Okay.
They briefly pushed that, put him in a suit, put him never play by play, but kind of on the side booth.
Right.
And
pre and post fight and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, they did that a little bit. Haven't lately. So then UFC fans, and this is something, you may have a different opinion than me on this, but UFC fans love to say fighters aren't paid, blah, 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 blah. The UFC stars, and I would use the word star lightly, the top 15, 20 guys, girls in each division are paid fairly well. If you just get in the UFC and you're not a big name, you're not going to get paid great, but it's not... Wonderboy's been paid a lot of money. He said he wanted to get paid something. Dana White Contender Series started last night. Dana White did a press conference after. Dana White, fairly animated, where he's like, listen, Wonderboy had his opponent come in 3 pounds over. He could have still taken the fight. He would have got half of his opponent's purse. Wonderboy said no. Wonderboy chose not to fight. Then we offered Wonderboy another fight. Wonderboy declined that fight. I'm not going to start a feud with Wonderboy. I've gotten along with him fine, but you guys don't know the whole story. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if his opponent was there and willing to fight 3 pounds over, I'm going to torture the guy and make him try and make weight at least. But yeah, I'm going to fight. And then if they offer, another guy, I don't know. In my camp, we just generally didn't say no. We'll fight whoever you put in front of us. That's just the way we operated. We were that confident in our skill set. But more than anything else, I have to side with Dana on that. I mean,
Interesting.
There's no way that Wonderboy Thompson can demand money when he had an opponent already there and somebody else that was going to step in and fight him. I mean, that you can't expect to get paid for that.
And that's essentially what Dana said. He said that a lot of the time when we pay guys their show money, their lower level guys, he says our goal is we want to reimburse you for your camp, your travel.
Well, your blood work, all the bullshit you've got to get done,
Yeah.
the EKGs and the scans, and there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of incurred costs with all of that stuff. There really is. And so, yeah, I've got to side with Dana on that.
That's interesting. And I would do the same thing. And I think just to the fans, I don't know, as there's fans watching, I think that the white knighting, the campaigning for fighters to get paid more, that people don't know everything. There was something interesting where in this fight card was in Utah, and there's a Utah law where they do not release the fighters' salaries unless the fighters sign off on it. And I thought this was very interesting, Pat. There was 12 fights on UFC 291 in Salt Lake City, so that means there was 24 fighters. Only 3 said it's okay for you to release how much I was paid. I think these UFC fighters almost don't want people to know what they're making because the fans have been on this crusade for a long time. I think it's fueled by a lot of media. Ariel Helwani likes to whine a lot. Luke Thomas likes to whine a lot. These fighters are starving and dying and can't take care of their families. And so it's interesting that out of 24 fighters, 21 did not want it released how much that they made. What do you think about all that? Because for a long time it was, UFC fighters don't get paid anything, and then these Conor McGregors and others come along, and then you realize that even people who aren't megastars like Conor, like a Wonderboy Thompson or an Ian Gary, that are actually, or Sugar Sean O'Malley, are doing quite well. They are making $250 to show up, $1,000, $250 to show up, $250 to win, and these aren't even the mega stars. So it's I think that the narrative that Dana and the UFC and now Endeavor are robbing from the fighters and lining their own pockets, maybe not entirely true, and fueled by a lot of...
No, there's a lot of millionaires being made.
Yeah.
Right? So there are. Now, when you're a fighter, if I look at the upcoming card, the fight night that we're going to cover on the odds and who we think is going to win the fights, you look at some of these fighters on there, and, they haven't even... you look at some of the records, and they have so little experience.
Yes.
That, you sit there and go, you don't really deserve to be paid that much money.
Yeah.
You don't. That's just the way it is. I'm sorry to say, prove yourself.
Yeah, and when you're...
Get into the top 10.
Exactly.
Start beating world-class people.
Exactly. And when you're a 4-0 fighter who's coming into the UFC for your first fight or two, you may have to work another job. That's just kind of how life works. And
right.
So yeah, and I think a lot of that is fueled by media, and people try to take on these crusades when these fighters that they're
talking about unionizing fighters. Well, that's virtually impossible because they're all independent contractors. It's not like they belong to a team. Right? They are part of an organization under contract as independent contractors. What are you going to do? You're going to get paid 10 and 10 for a fight, right? And then the union is going to take a certain percentage of that. Mm-hmm. Your trainer is going to get 10%. Your manager is going to get 20% or 10%. You got to pay for your bills. You got to do all this stuff. And you are going to give some of your money to a union?
Now you have union dues on top of everything else.
It's not going to happen.
No, something that sounds way better on paper than it does in reality.
The only reason they can unionize in the NFL and NBA and all that stuff is they belong to, the Dallas Cowboys' net worth as an organization is $9.3 billion. $9.3 billion. Your checks are written by Jerry Jones and the organization, right?
Yes.
So that's the only way. They're employees of the Dallas Cowboys, employees of the San Francisco 49ers, all that sort of stuff. So that's how they pull that off. And they're being paid massive amounts of money.
Yeah, and comparing the two leagues just isn't accurate. So yeah, when you look at the idea of a fighter union, the fans or even some fighters may think, why aren't we doing this? And then you actually get into it. And as
and here's the thing: years and years and years ago, the head dudes of the United Auto Workers in Detroit met with me. They wanted me to be like one of the head guys to push for unionization, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't really agree with the direction it was going. Fighting is the most capitalistic venture on the planet. It is a dog-eat-dog fucking world, right?
You make your own destiny in fighting.
And you have to go through massive, massive ups and downs. The training is, if you're going to be a world champ, you've got to train like a psychopath.
Yes.
You have to. And, so it's not going to happen. So whatever. Win a world title and make a bunch of money. You know, I had that talk with Rob Lawler when he was at 185 pounds in Strikeforce, and I said, dude, just you walk around at 190. You're fighting guys that cut from 225, and none of them are manhandling you. None of them are beating the shit out of you. Just drop to 170, put the work in, go knock all these fools out in the UFC, make a bunch of money, make millions of dollars, take care of your family, and do your thing. And he eventually went, yeah, I'm doing it. So,
And then he became a world champion.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how you become a millionaire.
Yeah. So I do agree the idea of a fighter union for the UFC just does not work. As Donald Trump would say, sounds great, doesn't work. So that is how I feel about the UFC fighter union. And just it's good to look into facts and math and stuff, and something that may sound like a great idea may not be.
Oh, speaking of great ideas, though, we can talk about Paul versus Diaz. How much money did Diaz make in that one?
They said about $5 billion
Good for him.
to lose.
Good for him.
To lose.
Good for him.
So he is definitely set. So I said that I liked fight goes over 7.5 rounds, and I like fight goes to decision, which was like plus 140. Had a bet on that. Both those bets won. Diaz was durable.
So you just won everything last week.
It was a good week last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I noticed you went out and bought a new Audi.
I would have liked to, and it was a good card, but I was so tired, and I had Houston calling me to meet up. I know that you were in town, and I just couldn't do it. I literally, as soon as the Sandhagen fight was over, I fell asleep.
You were out.
Took a lot out of me.
Okay.
So then we had Diaz and Paul. People were a little shocked that Jake Paul opened up at like minus 200, minus 180, and was steamed up to minus 350, as high as minus 400. This is why I preach on line movement a lot, Pat, because the line movement rarely lies.
Right.
Came out that Diaz certainly trained, but really never took the boxing thing seriously.
He really didn't train.
He
for it.
literally was throwing up guillotines, and the ref would have to pull him off. He looked like a fish out of water.
Well, he looked completely out of shape. He didn't look like a fish out of water when he decided to throw combos, but more than anything, he wasn't in the normal shape that he could be in, right? And I think that came with also when you don't have to make a lower weight that you normally fight at, because you have to get in shape to drop weight. You can't just starve and lose what you can, but excuse me, that's not beneficial. So he didn't have to cut the weight, so he didn't have to do all the running, didn't have to do, all the other stuff that goes along with that to get in really good cardio shape. So therefore, he just came in looking really soft and horsing around and getting $5 million.
Yeah, and to his credit, he played to the crowd. Jake Paul did knock him down once, but a lot of the other times Jake Paul would kind of jab him, and Diaz would be like, oh, and act like he was hurt. So he was entertaining, did play to the crowd, and to his credit, survived 10 rounds with Jake Paul. That's something Tyron Woodley couldn't do. That's something that Ben Askren could not do. So credit to him for that. Okay. 1 to 10 likelihood, and they did agree on it, but talk is cheap these days. Jake Paul, co-owner of PFL, agreed to fight Nate Diaz. He said, we're going to get paid $10 million apiece. We're going to do an MMA fight, my first professional MMA fight in PFL. What is the likelihood that happens, and what would happen if they fought in MMA?
Well, Jake Paul's a good enough wrestler to stop takedowns from Diaz and outbox him.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
That's
so
what
he
I'm
could
saying.
cause him problems because Jake Paul, like I said, is a good athlete. The Paul brothers are good athletes. So Diaz is going to have to get creative and get a sub, right?
You see people, and there's a lot of people on, and I don't want to disparage these people. A lot of these people are fans of us too, but you see people on social media that are like, oh, if they fought in MMA, he would kill him. Diaz would actually kill him.
It's an interesting matchup, though, right? It's an interesting
not
matchup.
so quick. I think that we haven't even seen Paul's all-state wrestling, so I think that, and credit to Jake Paul, he takes a lot of flack. I'm not entirely sure how he's still taking flack, the level of competition that he's beaten, but he is here to stay, and I don't think he'll ever be a linear boxing champion, but he's no joke. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Moving on. We have a fight, Pat. So we have Sean Strickland, who we're both a big fan of, not only as a fighter, but also as a talker and a personality. He is fighting Israel Adesanya. How did this fight happen? I will briefly tell you, and then we will get Miletich's thoughts on it. Dricus du Plessis beat up Robert Whittaker bad. He is next in line for the title shot. The UFC loves narratives. They love selling fights, similar to what Caged Aggression is doing at the Miletich-Mike Jackson fight. Everyone loves a good story. So, du Plessis is from South Africa. Adesanya is from Nigeria, but has lived in New Zealand for most of his life. So du Plessis said, I want to be the first true African champion who lives in Africa. That was blown way out of proportion and was made to make du Plessis look like this awful racist who was saying that Adesanya was not a true African. Adesanya, like he does, played the victim card, played fully into this. They had a very awkward, N-word filled face-off at the UFC fights where du Plessis won. So everyone's like, that's the fight to make. Du Plessis, bit of an injury, says, I cannot make the quick turnaround at Sydney for UFC 293. So Strickland goes on the Joe Rogan podcast and keeps calling Adesanya the Chinese champion. Joe Rogan finally is like, what are you talking about? Like, I understand the Nigerian New Zealand thing. Why do you keep calling him the Chinese champion? And I'm going to turn to Sean Strickland here for a second. Strickland goes, Joe, have you not seen the video? And Rogan's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So Strickland shows the video. This video
Did they
blows
pull it up on screen on Rogan's show?
Rogan would not do that.
Wouldn't?
Rogan is trying to not get canceled these days. He's not quite as gun-ho, ballsy pirate ship as he used to be. Anyway, Strickland then posts the video on his social media, and no one had seen this video, Pat. And it goes from like 100 views to 1 million views overnight. And it's literally Adesanya, who got paid a lot of money back in the early days before the UFC, got paid a lot of money to come over to China and do commercials for China. And it is the cringiest shit you will ever see. It is literally Adesanya doing a bit of a Chinese accent. And he's doing the bowing. He's like, I have moved to China. I live in China. I am happy to be in China. And then the cherry on top of the cringe sundae, he goes, Israel Adesanya, black outside, China inside. So Strickland will not let this go. And thank you, Strickland, for sharing this gold with the world. And then Strickland wins a very impressive fight, I believe the next week, over Abu, this Russian killing machine. Strickland survives the first round and then makes this killing machine Terminator that everyone's terrified, who won his first UFC fight in like 15 seconds by terrifying head kick. Strickland gets in there, spars, boxes, knocks him out in the second round. He gets the mic. He goes, you know who I want? I want the Chinese champion. Give me Israel Adesanya, the Chinese champion.
Wow.
Israel Adesanya, bit of a fantastic fighter.
I think Adesanya is probably going, this is perfect. It's going to sell a shitload of tickets and pay-per-views. And Adesanya's got to be saying to himself, compared to what Pereira did to Strickland, he's probably thinking to himself, I'm going to beat the living shit out of this guy and make him pay for it, right?
Exactly.
And so the fight's on.
Fight's on, baby. Fight's on. It was officially announced yesterday. It had been rumored for a while.
Strickland is a funny son of a bitch. So.
Oh, my God, it was so funny. And you could tell when he's about to say something non-PC that's going to get people around.
He's made a great comeback after getting knocked out by Pereira.
He really has. He gets this twinkle in his eyes, and he goes, you know who I want, Joe Rogan? Give me the Chinese champion. And he got it. So there is something. And I do like it, Pat, and I think that you would agree. I like it when guys can use their mouth and trash talk a little bit to get the wheels moving, but they have the talent to back it up. And I think we saw that with Chael Sonnen. Did his talk get him some fights that maybe he wouldn't have had? Sure. But the guy could wrestle. He was tough as shit. He deserved everything that he got. Colby Covington has his talking gotten a little extra, sure, but he's deserved everything that he's gotten. So I think that you talk about, and I really liked what you said earlier about how it's the ultimate capitalism. Sure, you can do a little bit of talking, but It's the what you do in the cage that matters.
Got to back it up.
All right, I think we have one more news story, then we'll move into some picks. Shout out to our boy Austin Hubbard. When Pat and I and our friend Burmis were the announcers, commentators, analysts for Caged Aggression, Austin Hubbard was in the crowd. He is a Caged Aggression alumni. He trained with you some, right? Hubbard came down and trained with you
When he
some?
was real young, yeah.
Yeah. So he talked about, because he was fresh off Ultimate Fighter, even though Ultimate Fighter is showing on your TVs now, there was an episode last night. Ultimate Fighter filmed in like February, late January, February. So that's when it filmed. That's when all these things happened. So Hubbard knew what had happened. He could not talk about it. He had signed 18 million contracts. He could not talk about it. But when he talked to us, he had a big smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye. And as soon as he got off the mic, Miletich elbows me and he goes, Hubbard's in the final. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, he couldn't say anything, but I was just like, just my intuition, my gut was like, I know how tough that kid is. And I just felt very strongly that he had run like ransack over the rest of the guys. And because he is that tough. Remember, he came to Colorado, Vail, Colorado, when I called a fight for the LFA out there. And he was fighting a guy that they were really, really high on. And Austin Hubbard came in and beat the living shit out of the guy and just rained all over their parade with that. And, I mean, Austin has just consistently been a very, very hard worker and a very tough guy.
And was my first time ever meeting him in person, super kind and gracious, and just kind of had that twinkle in his eye. Like he had a secret that he was dying to tell us but couldn't. And yeah, you did. You nudged me and you go, Hubbard's in the final. And son of a bitch, Austin Hubbard is in the Ultimate Fighter finale. We have one more episode of Ultimate Fighter. I'm not sure anyone's watching.
Who's he going to be fighting?
He will be fighting UFC veteran Kurt Holobaugh.
Okay.
And Kurt Holobaugh fought Jason Knight last night on Ultimate Fighter, Pat, and it was a barn burner. It was the best fight of the season. I have watched not every minute of every episode, but I've kind of watched recaps of every episode, and I have watched all the fights. It was fucking awesome. It was
great.
They threw down two former UFC guys, and that's the way the Ultimate Fighter was set up, and that's the bracket Hubbard was in. All of Chandler's guys, ex-UFC guys, all of Connor's guys, prospects who never fought in the UFC. They're all trying to get into the UFC or back into the UFC. Holobaugh and Knight threw down, and now Hubbard faces the winner of that fight, which is Holobaugh. Should be a fun fight.
Beautiful.
And you will be able to bet on that. You cannot bet on the Ultimate Fighter fights because they happened 6-7 months ago. You can bet on the finales. Those will be on a regular UFC card. And I think our boy Hubbard will be a decent favorite against Holobaugh.
Awesome.
All right. Oh, one more thing. Bellator, Pat. There are rumors of them selling. They have let some free agents like Michael Venom Page and the Pitbull brothers and Nemkov go to other organizations. So here's what they're doing, Pat. Today's Wednesday. Friday, I bet every Bellator card. They are doing an 18-fight card on Friday. I never in my life, in 5 years of professionally betting PFL, Bellator, UFC, a little bit of LFA, a little bit of Cage Warriors, a little bit of Invicta, a little bit of ONE FC. I've never seen an 18-fight card. So there will be 18 Bellator fights on Friday. And then they announced, and that's Bellator 298, and then they do Bellator 299, and for Bellator 300, which has been rumored to be their right off into the sunset card, they have 4 title fights. So it seems like they're kind of doing a fire sale, trying to cram everything in, and then nothing is official, but it has been heavily rumored that after Bellator 300, they will look to sell, liquidate, whatever. Thoughts on that? Thoughts on...
Well, I said before, I mean,
the whole business of it.
Bellator, it's a shitty name to start with. It caters to, a billion people that are Latino. They understand it, but most people are like, Bellator, that's too complicated. It needs to be something simple. Whatever that, and that's not a slight to anybody who's Latino. It's just the name didn't, and it had a negative connotation with Bjorn Rebney was the biggest drawback with it. And then the tournaments, the ongoing nonstop fucking tournaments. You didn't know who was what. You didn't know what was going on, if people were coming or going. It's just too confusing, right? And so they never got traction in my mind, and nobody ever took them serious. And they weren't building their own stars. They weren't literally building their own stars like Scott Coker did with Strikeforce. He built stars.
Yeah.
That's what he did. I mean, that's why the UFC bought them out, because they had so many stars and they had so many tough athletes. So it just, I don't know. It was just a shitty idea from the get-go in my mind. And I tried to actually tell Showtime, and they didn't listen. So
I think that's fair. It's certainly gave us some entertaining fights. We had Kimbo Slice fighting Ken Shamrock, but it really, what I called it was, you know how there's like a senior tour for golf. So when these guys get to be 60 or over or whatever, they go to the senior tour.
I think it's 55.
Oh, is it 55?
Yeah, I should be playing in that, actually.
So they go to the senior tour. They can still make some money, semi-competitive golf. They put it on some random channel. Bellator.
Dude depends commercials.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Bellator became...
How can you golf that long without going piss? Well,
especially if
I'm
you're
sponsored by Depends, bro.
Years old. You're onto something. You're onto something.
Maybe Depends would sponsor me for my fight with Jackson.
Yeah, that's well.
Are you wearing a cup? No, I'm wearing Depends.
How much would that have to pay you for you to do a Depends commercial?
Oh dear God. Oh God.
Six figures, I would think, at least.
So with Jerry Jones, was it the coach of the Miami Dolphins, former coach of the University of Miami?
I see his. No, Jerry Jones is the owner of the Cowboys.
Yeah, but Jones, right?
Yeah, I can literally, yes. Keep on going. I literally see his face in my head. He had slick back hair.
I did a boner pill commercial with him.
Get the fuck out of here. Is it on YouTube?
I don't know. Boss Rutan called me up one time and he saw it in Canada. He was laughing so hard he could barely talk. Jones looks at me and goes, "Pat, do all your friends know you're on Extends?" And I go, "Well, they do now. They do now."
Jimmy Johnson was his name.
Jimmy Johnson.
I have to find this commercial. I have to.
It's sad, dude.
If anyone can find this
so
commercial,
he had a whole script he was reading off of, and they didn't give me any lines. They just had me ad-lib the whole time. So I was just fucking around the whole time.
Oh. Aren't you always kind of ad-libbing?
That's how we get through life.
I think you always kind of are.
And put our foot in our mouth now and then.
You always kind of are. And so with Bellator, I will savor betting these last 3 cards, and they should be fun. I mean, we're talking doing 18 fights on Friday. In a month and a half, we're gonna have 4 title fights. I mean, we're just gonna get it all out of our systems and see what happens with Bellator. All right, we have some fights to bet on, Pat. Let's try to continue the success of last week as we move into the fights here. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right. 13 fights as of now. We are going to start off with Juliana Miller and Luana Santos. Get you some odds here. I got to scroll through that 1,800 Bellator fights to get to this. So Luana Santos opened up at minus 145. She's now minus 162. Not an insane line move, but she is a decent favorite. She's 150, 160, depending on what your sports book is. Juliana Miller comes back at 125, plus 130, plus 135, somewhere in that neighborhood. Who you got here, Pat?
Well, I'm leaning with the way the odds have moved, certainly. But Santos, I think, neither one has had a ton of fights, obviously. But Santos went 2-1 in the LFA, so that's a it's not easy to get through the LFA.
Yeah,
there are some quality athletes in there, so that definitely makes me lean a little more towards her.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. This is Juliana Miller is 3-2
in the UFC.
So she 1-1 in the UFC.
There's 8 billion people on the planet.
Here we go.
No, I'm serious.
There we go.
There's 8 billion people on the planet. Half of those roughly are women. And the UFC has a girl fighting that's 3-2. How, I mean, are there not people out? I'm not saying anything negative about her as a human being or anything, but this is the UFC.
This is
8 billion people.
And there's more women than there are men. So, yeah, this is
it doesn't make
weird.
it doesn't. I don't know what's going on.
Weird.
Are they? Come on, ladies, start training. Let's go.
So part of this is she was on the Pena Nunez Ultimate Fighter that no one fucking watched. So apparently she won a couple fights on that.
yeah.
She may have even won the Ultimate Fighter, it looks like. And then
You're like,
who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
I really didn't watch 1 minute of it. So Veronica Hardy, the wife of Dan Hardy, who was considered one of the worst female fighters in the UFC, beat her handily in their last fight.
Dan Hardy's going to knock your ass out.
She's beautiful. I don't think she's a very good fighter, but she used to be Veronica Macedo, now Veronica Hardy.
Okay.
Beautiful. Beautiful woman.
Okay. Just not a very good fighter.
It's not a very good fighter.
But she beat Miller.
Are we cool, Dan Hardy? Don't. He's a little bit crazy. That's not a guy I want to make mad. And he let go by the UFC. Apparently, he pissed Dana off, but picked up by PFL. So he was just on PFL last week with our buddy Randy Couture announcing those fights. So good for him for finding another gig.
Yeah.
So I like Santos here. It's really a fade of Juliana Miller. Juliana Miller has not been impressive at all.
All right. We spent way too much time on that fight.
Moving on. We have Damon Blackshear. He is fighting Jose Johnson. Who you got here, Pat?
I think Johnson is vulnerable on the ground. I think that's where he ends up getting himself in trouble with Blackshear most likely. I mean, Johnson has proven to have some knockout power.
Yeah.
I mean, he can bang, but I think Blackshear can best him in this one. I think he may pull off a submission in it.
So Blackshear is minus 188, minus 200, depending on your book. Blackshear did not look good in his last fight. He did not look good at all. So what does that mean? I'm not sure yet. The line hasn't really done much. It's been pretty stale. I have to look into this fight more to know what I'm doing. And I just want to see what the line does throughout the week. It's only Wednesday. But I will say, when handicapping fights, when betting fights, and really sports in general, you should never say, oh, this guy sucked in his last fight. This girl sucked in her last fight. This football team sucked in their last fight. There's no way that I'm betting them. The pendulum always swings. This does not mean that Damon Blackshear is all of a sudden a terrible fighter. In fact, if he looked bad in his last fight, it is more likely that he would look good in his next fight. It is always regress to the mean. And Pat, when you had a showing that you weren't necessarily proud of, how did you come out? How did you train for your next fight?
Oh, always harder.
Yes.
Always harder.
Talk about that.
And mainly, a lot of my issues were fighting with pretty severe injuries and things like that, where I needed the money, so I fought anyway. That sort of mentality. But yeah, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and you are motivated to come out, and you're only as good as your last fight, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I would argue, and I believe the math backs it up. Not only should you not be betting against a fighter because they looked bad in their last fight, you should probably be more likely to bet for them if the math backs it up, because that's how it works. The pendulum always swings, regress to the mean. Find yourself in the center. All right, we have Montserrat Ruiz is fighting Jacqueline Amorim. I have been told to not call these chick fights, so these female fighters who we have great respect for, we will not call this a chick fight, even though this is already our second female fight of the night. Women fighters, who we respect very much, are fighting Montserrat Ruiz, Jacqueline Amorim. Who do you got here, Pat?
I'm going with Jacqueline, actually. I mean, she undefeated in the LFA, 4-0. Yes. As I just said a little bit earlier, it's not easy to get through the LFA, certainly with 4 wins. 0-1 in the UFC, lost a decision to Sam Hughes, who's very tough.
No shame in that.
No, not at all. So, yeah, with Ruiz, quality of opponents, decent, but nothing, stellar. She didn't have that hard of a road so far. So, yeah, I'm leaning towards Amorim.
Are you familiar with Montserrat's fight against Cheyenne Vlismas, formerly Cheyenne Bays? It was her first fight in the UFC, and it was the funniest shit ever. Very little technique. She literally put Cheyenne Bays, now Cheyenne Vlismas, in a kind of a big brother headlock and she did it for all 3 rounds, and Cheyenne Vlismas had no idea how to defend against it.
What, like a front headlock?
It was literally a headlock. She
Or
literally
just held her on the ground?
She literally, yes, it was
In a headlock.
it was a headlock she started every round by putting her in a headlock and then just kind of throwing her on the ground and just kind of punching her and laying on top of her, always in a headlock position. I've never seen anything like it. And
because people that are good at jiu-jitsu will get out of a headlock and take your fucking back.
yes, that's what the announcers were saying, is that they're being fairly respectful, probably more respectful than I would have been, that
the commentators at the UFC obviously are told to toe the company line.
yes.
So they do their best not to talk negatively about any athletes or things like that, usually, which I try to stay away from just generally because I just, they're tough enough to get in there, willing to get in there and give it a shot and roll the dice. I'm going to respect them a certain amount, obviously. But yeah, knowing how to get out of headlocks is like day one jiu-jitsu
Exactly, and that's what the announcer, I think Bisbeen was literally having a stroke trying to be nice, but he was, basically saying that that's day one, and if you can't find your way out of a headlock, then that you probably don't have any business being in the UFC. So that's what happened there. So yeah, it's interesting to me. We have seen a Morum open up as a massive favorite, like minus 350. She has been bet down to minus 250. Now, we saw this happen. What I pay much more attention to positive line movement than I do negative line movement, but I pay attention to both. We saw our girl Tatiana Suarez open up at like minus 500, get bet down to like minus 430. I still believed in Suarez. She went out there and looked very good. So it's a case by case basis. We'll see what the line does here, but you're getting a better price. There's no reason for me not to still like a Morum here, but just be aware that her line has dipped a little bit.
Yep.
Martin Boudet, Josh Parisian. We have heavyweights throwing down here. Pat Boudet minus 225, Parisian plus 185. Parisian, they keep keeping him around. The UFC needs heavyweights, but he has proven to be, I would say, a pretty below average UFC heavyweight. Boudet has some potential, has some jiu-jitsu, has some striking. Boudet seems like the far higher ceiling to me, Pat, but it's heavyweights. Anything can fucking happen. Who do you got here?
I think Parisian's in a little bit of trouble with this young man.
Yeah.
I think Boudet is pretty quality. He's lost one decision. That's the one blemish on his record. Besides that, he's finished 8 people. So that's a pretty good finish rate, well above the 500 mark. He's a tough guy, so I look for him to win this one. I don't know if it goes the distance.
4-0 in the UFC, Pat, and his only loss was his second fight ever to a fellow UFC fighter in Juan Espino. Let's see what fight goes is. Fight goes. That's double your money either way. And the line just got dropped today, so it has not moved. So minus 110 on either side.
Okay.
Francis Marshall. Let's see. That is. Okay, Francis Marshall is fighting Isaac Dolgarian. That sounds like a name straight out of Game of Thrones. Who do you got here, Pat? Francis Marshall is minus 160. Dolgarian is plus 130.
Don't sleep on Dolgarian. He's finished all of his opponents as an amateur and as a pro.
I like it.
He's finished everybody.
I like it.
So pay attention to that. It is his UFC debut, I believe.
It is.
But it's not like he's fighting a guy that has a million fights and has been in the UFC forever either. So
exactly.
Quality of opponents for Marshall have been meh, not real high. And, Dolgarian also. But Dolgarian is going out and literally finishing everyone. So I actually lean towards him with plus money.
I love it when we agree, Pat. Francis Marshall opened up at minus 190 on Caesar Sportsbook. He is now minus 155. This will be my first plus money underdog bet of the card. Not a lock it in, not a go bet your mortgage, but on this fight, I prefer the underdog, and so does my co-host, Pat Miletich. Beautiful stuff. All right, moving on, a guy that I have had 4-figure bets against in his last 2 UFC fights. It's nothing personal, Terrence McKinney. You just can't get a win when the fight does not end in the first round, and I have made a good amount of money off of that. So, I had him when he fought Bone Theme. I had about 1,000 on Bone Theme, and then when the fight started the second round, I hit it again for 1,000. The odds were a good bit higher. And then I did not have a bet on his last fight until it started the second round. I think I was even smart about this. About 30 seconds left in the first round, his opponent was like, and McKinney did win that first round, but
McKinney was gassing.
And I could tell that. So with about 30 seconds left, I got his opponent was about minus 150. I put 1,000 on that, and sure enough, about a minute into the second round, McKinney was tapping. So McKinney, all the talent in the world. Really quick turnaround here, Pat. I think we're talking less than a month. I think we're talking like a 3-week turnaround here. So we see him as a large favorite. Opened up at minus 360 over on DraftKings. He's now minus 280. He's fighting Mike Breeden, who is certainly a tough guy, but not the most talented guy in the world. I will probably treat this as I do most Terrence McKinney fights. I will probably not bet it. If we get close to starting the second round, I will consider a live bet on Breeden. Thoughts on that, Pat?
Well, it makes sense. But I actually think McKinney might be able to submit him in the first round. I really do. And, if he doesn't, then there's going to be some issues probably.
There is, and I would not be completely against betting that exact situation to happen. Not just betting Terrence McKinney to win, but betting Terrence McKinney to win by finish in the first round. The odds for that would probably be about minus 130. You would shrink McKinney from minus 300 to minus 130. Because if he's going to win, it's probably going to be by finish in the first round.
Yeah.
And then, if that finish doesn't happen, you are hammering the other side in Breeden. Be careful if that, but that would be the sharper way to approach it. Next up, we have Marcus McGee is fighting J.P. Bays. J.P. Bays is the ex-husband of Cheyenne Bays, now Cheyenne Vlismas. Cheyenne Vlismas could not stop a very basic headlock from Montserrat Ruiz, who we just covered a few fights earlier. Everything's kind of connected here in the UFC, Pat. Everyone's kind of related. Who do you got winning this fight and why?
Leaning towards McGee. I mean, the only way JP Baez wins this fight is probably on the ground, and I don't see him. I mean, McGee's no stellar jiu-jitsu, no Terrence Gracie or anything.
Yeah.
But his striking is pretty solid, pretty dangerous standing up, and Baez has faced some pretty tough guys, decent quality of opponents. McGee, some athletes, but not really anything special to me. But I lean towards McGee in this fight.
Yeah.
He's got enough of the tools that I think he can pull it off.
You are a McGee fan. I believe in McGee's first UFC fight, which was this spring. You liked him at plus money. He won. And a guy that you seem to be familiar with. He is not plus money here, Pat. He is a minus 400 favorite.
Right.
The bookmakers are believing that J.P. Bays is on, Bays is how you pronounce it. So J.P. Bays is on his way out, and Marcus McGee is on his way up. So
It is Buys, right?
It is, but I believe the South African pronunciation is Bays.
That's just their stupid accent. His name is Baez. Fucking pronounce it correctly, right? It's not an A. It's not an A.
My South African accent. All right.
That's I love South Africans actually. I've got some very good South African friends.
Are we going to? We're going to
but
buy.
Bay.
Bay. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a U, man. It's a U. It's Maybe that's my stupid Iowa accent. Sorry.
Pretty confident McGee wins this. Are you okay with him being a parlay piece?
I mean, most likely. I'm not. He's going to win. He'll win.
Okay.
Yeah. My intuition, my gut always messes with me, though, on certain things. I don't know what it is.
You think that there's at least a chance that JP finds a choke in there?
Potentially. I mean, crazier things have happened, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, but McGee most likely going to win. The people that are betting him up obviously know what they're talking about as well. So the odds, obviously, yes, lean heavily towards McGee. And I do think he's probably most likely going to win. But, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's a weird feeling I get on fights sometimes.
No, and usually the math agrees with your feelings, Pat. We haven't seen a huge move for McGee. He opened up at minus 360 on draft. He opened up at minus 355 on DraftKings. He's only moved 5 points. So
Okay.
it's not like the whales are hammering him. They're saying, minus 355 for a guy with one UFC fight, fighting a guy with, I believe, 4 UFC fights.
I think he's, 1-1 in Contender from my notes and 0-3 in the actual UFC.
Okay, so yeah, we can call that 5.
Yeah.
5 UFC fights, only 1 and 4 in those UFC level fights, but they are saying minus 360 sounds about fair. I don't feel comfortable dumping a ton of money on that. So, Jamie Pickett just recently was finished in a very weird choke that felt like it took 5 years to set up from Bo Nickel, but he did eventually get it, found the first round finish of Jamie Pickett. He is fighting Josh Fremd. We saw Fremd open up at minus 270. He's now minus 350. This is our biggest line move of the card so far, Pat. Do you agree with Fremd?
This is really interesting. So if you dig into these guys,
talk to me.
Pickett kind of isn't very good on the ground, right? He's more of a striker. He's been submitted several times. In fights. Fremd, a guy who is better on the ground in my mind, but dear God, Fremd lost to a guy that was 3-2 in his last loss by guillotine choke. Look at his record. He lost to a guy that's 3-2, correct?
And a guy that he was favored to beat, Trayshawn Gore, has looked awful in his UFC run.
It's just, I look at this and go, who's going to fuck up first?
Yeah.
You know? Who's going to beat themselves? I don't know. Josh Fremd's actually a really good guy, and he is a tough guy. He's a good fighter. But he got caught by a guy with a 3-2 record and choked. Everybody has bad days, but I lean towards Fremd winning this fight, though. Because Pickett, isn't very good on the ground. So
I would lean toward Fremd winning also. I actually liked Fremd quite a bit. He would be, as of now, one of my favorite bets on this card. I'm just not a big believer in Jamie Pickett. I'd pick just about anyone in this division to beat Jamie Pickett. And I agree with my UFC Hall of Famer co-host Pat Miletich. I think that Fremd did get caught in a choke, but I think that was more of a chance luck thing. And
there is no such thing as luck in fighting.
Talk to me about that.
The guy didn't put the guillotine on him to fucking wear his own arms out and miss it, right?
But talk to me about it.
People don't throw punches and kicks to miss them.
Talk to me about it being a game of millimeters. So if I am throwing a strike that really I didn't aim it correctly, and my opponent's head is here, and I just flat out miss, and I throw it here, and he for some reason ducks maybe into he circles away, circles right into my punch. There's a little bit of luck there, right? Obviously, there's a ton of training, ton of technique, ton of athleticism, but you have to factor in maybe like 5% luck.
I think it's always falls in the category of someone made a mistake and got caught. Shitty defense, shitty footwork, shitty head movement, whatever. That's where it falls in the category of bad luck.
Okay.
Maybe.
Fair enough. All right, we have Tafon in Chukwi is fighting AJ Dobson. Who you got here, Pat?
It's kind of a toss-up for me, to be honest with you. Quality of opponents for how do I pronounce his name? Nchukwi?
Yes, in Chukwi.
His quality of opponents have been mediocre at best. At the same time, Dobson's 0-2 in the UFC, but he's actually a pretty decent fighter. So in my mind, it's kind of a toss-up. I think Dobson actually might pull off a victory here.
The line movement agrees with you, Pat. Nchukwi has stayed very stale. I'm looking at really every sports book. He either opened at 145 or minus 150, and he has stayed there. So no movement. The sports books agree with you. The line was set correctly. So as of now, I am not loving a bet on this fight either way.
Okay.
Polyana Viana, she is the underdog, plus 155 to Lucindo. Lucindo has looked fairly good in the UFC. She is minus 190. Who you got here, Pat?
Lucindo looks like her quality of opponent slightly better. She's got 8 finishes by striking, and on the losing side of the ground game. So I think when I look at these girls and I look at their movements and things like that, physically, athletically, I lean a little bit towards Lucindo, but Viana is much better on the ground.
Yes.
So I think paying attention to where the fight's taking place is going to be probably pretty indicative of the outcome in my mind.
I agree with that. This is another one that we've seen be fairly stale. I like Lucindo. I had a bet on Lucindo in her last fight. It won. Again, that does not mean that you should rush to your phone or your local casino to hammer her. Look into the math, look into the matchup, and I think Pat hit the nail on the head. This should be a close fight, and I'm not loving a bet either way. This next fight is fascinating to me, Pat, because we have two guys in Chris Daukaus and Khalil Roundtree, who when they are on, they look like they could beat just about anyone.
Right.
When they are off, they look like they could be beaten by just about anyone in the UFC. This fight is difficult to handicap for that reason. We saw Roundtree open at minus 205. He's been bet down to minus 180. Not a massive move. I usually look for about 40, 50 points, but it has certainly caught my interest. We're now at a 35-point move. Roundtree, Daukaus, or just pass on this fight altogether because these two guys are kind of hard to handicap.
Yeah, Daukaus, lost his last 3 fights, had kind of a rough road.
One more loss, and he's probably looking to go to PFL or somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think Roundtree is going to probably pull out the victory here. I think he's going to get him.
It does seem like two guys in different stages of their career. Roundtree has been around for a very long time, has been on the verge of being cut himself, seems to be on a resurgence lately. He's a super smart guy, has talked about he moved to New York City and it took care of some of his mental health and really seems to have improved where he's at as a fighter.
Wait a minute. He moved to New York to fix his brain? Who does that? You go to Montana and Iowa and shit to do that, right? Get out in the woods and chill out.
That is actually a good point, Pat. But that's
grow your own food.
Seems to have worked for him. But so Roundtree has looked very good lately. Daukaus has looked awful lately. So it is interesting. Well, now Daukaus, there are two Daukaus brothers. Kyle Daukaus was already cut from the UFC, which is crazy. Both these brothers were brought in. Both prospects, both said they would be the first brother UFC champions. It has not worked out. Kyle Daukaus has already been cut from the UFC. Chris Daukaus, if he loses this fight, will be cut from the UFC. So interesting to me that we've seen Roundtree's odds drop a little. Nothing major, but worth keeping an eye on. Co-main event time. We have the legend Cub Swanson against the prospect Hakeem Dawodu. Are you taking the legend at plus 190 or the prospect at minus 225 here, Pat?
Well, the math tells me, I mean, I love Cub Swanson. He's a great fighter. He's got 1 million fights. What's he got, 40-some fights probably.
Yes.
His quality of opponents, you look at the who's who of
Doesn't get much better.
Yeah, but he has at the same time, when you're the math guy, he's lost 7 of his last 10 fights. Been kind of a rough deal for him, and Dawodu is kind of on the rise. He's done well in the UFC, 6-3.
Yeah,
that's a pretty respectable percentage in the toughest organization in the world. So I have to lean towards Dawodu in this one.
Yeah, I think that you kind of have to, and this fight is interesting. We've seen Dawodu struggle with takedown defense a bit. That's where Mosfar Evloev was able to get him. That's where Danny Henry was able to get him. Evloev just kind of held him down and controlled him. Henry was able to submit him. When you think Cub Swanson, you don't really think wrestling. You think the striking and the toughness. I think that the speed of Dawadu. The output of Dawadu will be a bit too much for Cub unless he's able to mix in some wrestling. Again, never a great wrestler. And unless he can kind of find a power shot, I think that Dawadu probably just looks like the faster, more athletic guy. Main event time. A guy that I'm a big fan of, Rafael Dos Anjos, is fighting Vicente Luque. A bit of an interesting, and I'll let you folks Google this on your own, bit of an interesting storyline with Luque here. Luque, there was a brain bleed discovered on him, so he was pulled from his UFC fight. This was just about 5 months ago. So I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be a doctor. I let doctors do doctor jobs and sports handicappers do sports handicapping jobs. But that's a little concerning that he was pulled from a fight literally with a life-threatening brain bleed and is now back fighting 5 months later. But that's not my job. It's not my job to tell guys when they can and can't medically fight. It's my job to bet the fight. So, Rafael Dos Anjos is minus 120. Vicente Luque is plus 100. This is essentially a coin flip fight, Pat. Who do you have winning and why?
It is a toss-up. Quality of opponents, obviously, for both these guys, been very, very tough. You know, Dos Anjos literally does not have the power to knock anyone out. He's got, 5 KOs out of, he's got 40-some fights. He doesn't have a whole lot of power. So Luque doesn't have to worry there, right? Rob Lawler tore his ACL in, very early on in the fight with Dos Anjos when he fought him. Rob couldn't move. Dos Anjos still couldn't stop him.
Yeah.
Rob was just standing. I was wondering what the hell was going on, too.
Yeah.
And I talked to Rob after that fight, and he said, dude, I hurt my knee really bad, and I couldn't move. I couldn't hardly walk. And Dos Anjos still couldn't finish him.
Yeah.
Which tells you Dos Anjos does not have a whole lot of power.
Yeah.
It also tells you Rob's a tough son of a bitch, but
yeah.
Which is very obvious. But I almost lean towards Luque here. I'm leaning towards Luque. That's my gut, my intuition on this one.
Yeah, obviously, if he's been cleared to fight, then the brain bleed and the concerns have alleviated. And you look at Luque; he's a bit younger than Rafi Dos Anjos is, and he would have the power advantage. They probably neutralize each other out
on the ground.
They're
both very good on the ground. Dos Anjos has gone to 26 decisions.
Shoo.
More decision wins than most fighters have fights. So that's that he tells you he's got great endurance. He's won 16 of those, lost 10 of them. So he's got great endurance, just not a very, very powerful guy. I think he's kind of undersized for that weight division, to be honest with you.
Let me give you a bet that I do like here, and then we will wrap things up. I like over 2.5 rounds. I also like fight starts round 4. This is a 5-round fight for a reason. Usually MMA fights are 3 rounds. This is a main event, so it is 5 rounds. I think we see it start the main event rounds. So that is essentially double your money.
I like
Fight
it.
starts round 4.
All right.
Double your money on that. Thank you so much for watching. We have UFC Boston next week. That is a super fun card. Let me check. It is UFC 292. Sugar Sean O'Malley, Aljamain Sterling, Brad Tavares, Chris Weidman, and I believe there's another title fight on that. So very excited for the big pay-per-view next week. We may have a special guest next week. That's exciting. But we have Vicente Luque, Rafael Dos Anjos is this week. There are several bets that we like a lot. Thank you for watching. You're watching right now. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Share with the world. Share with your friends. Miletich, any parting words?
Diamine Inc., baby.
All right. All right. I will see you next week. MMA Mobsters. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. Make some money on the fights, and we'll see you next week for UFC 292. We love you guys. Thank you.
All right. That's kind of an interesting card
It is an interesting card.
when we look at betting stuff on it.
It
right?
is. It is, yeah. Yeah, I'm liking that over 2.5 rounds quite a bit for the main